Hello, everyone. Once again, welcome back. I'm broadcasting here from the land of the Jar Jar Wrong, and I also too like to welcome again Helen to the study. We're still. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, Dave. How are you?
Oh, flat out busy, but a good busy. And
Yep.
Joe's just about to join us as well. Just going to add him
Yeah.
to the stream. Hi, Joe. We're just gone live now, so welcome, Joe. And
Okay. I had some trouble getting the microphone to work, but it's
that's all right. Well, before we continue on the study, I'd just like to acknowledge that of the land of the elders past, present, and future of the land of the Jar Jar Wrong, and wherever else everyone is watching from and participating from. Also acknowledge the struggle of the first people was originally only a colonial struggle, but is now a much broader struggle against imperialism and as part of the broader class struggle. And once again, I always say this: black and white unite to fight. We need to harness our forces against a common enemy, which especially real needed today. Well, we're still continuing on this reading. We've got probably another 5 chapters to go, 5 or 6 chapters to go. We are now on chapter 14 on human rights. It's interesting, and some quite on these chapters are quite relevant to our times, especially what's been going on here in Australia as well, but no doubt around the world. Also, too, welcome James, who's watching tonight as well, and anyone else that happens to be just quietly watching on YouTube or Facebook or even on Twitter. I'm just going to ask is anyone that is watching, please share this out. Please share far and wide. Encourage other people to join on. And if you like to ask a question or comment, please just post in a comment, just on the comment, and we'll try to on the comment section, and we will try to endeavour to address it. Well, look, what we'll do tonight. We're on 14, as I said. I guess we'll just read. We'll continue to read. So, Helen, did you want to kick it off?
Sure. So, chapter 14 on human rights. We are a country that has suffered in Latin America. The 80s and 90s, one of the most cruel expression regarding the systematic violation of human rights by state agents planned, promoted, and protected by the regimes of Fernando Belaunde Terre and Alan Garcia Perez and Alberto Fujimori. This policy had a history, but with a lower amount. The violation of human rights means a peak in the dehumanization of society, even more so when it comes to tolerate it and becomes indifferent. Our party condemns and rejects any act of violation of human rights that threatens the physical and psychological integrity of individuals and peoples. The Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, of which Peru is a member state, and its validity dates from 2002, states with respect to crimes against humanity. This means murder, extermination, slavery, deportation, or forced transfer of population, incarceration, or other serious deprivation of physical freedom in violation of fundamental norms of international law, torture, rape, sexual slavery, forced prostitution, forced pregnancy, forced sterilization, or any other form of sexual violence of comparable gravity, persecution of a group or collectivity with its own identity based on political, racial, national, ethnic, cultural, religious, gender, or any other reasons. Any other reasons universally recognized: forced disappearance of persons, the crime of apartheid, other inhumane acts of similar nature that intentionally cause great suffering or seriously threaten physical integrity or of mental or physical health. Okay. The largest power. Oh, sorry. Go. Yep.
Yeah, you going, Dave, or do you want me to go?
All right, I'll go and I'll do the next three. Sorry, I should have been clearer. We'll do 3 paragraphs at a time. The largest power on the planet, the United States of America, is currently not a member and has not ratified its agreement with the Rome Statute. However, it promotes the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, through which it imparts justice based on its perspective and interests, an institution that it has currently also refused to integrate, despite financially paying for it, having the majority of North American employees and having its headquarters in Washington. Logically, this paradox has had an explanation exclusively of geopolitical domination. The IACHR, like the Inter-American Press Association, IAPA, are in charge of qualifying which countries comply with the standards of their democracy. They serve as pressure pistons against leftist or progressive governments, and after that analysis, the foreign policy regarding them from sanctions, commercial economic blockade, Cold War coups d'etat, or military intervention. The United States manufacture its own theory, ideology or superstructure towards other countries in order to maintain neocolonialism. The 30 human rights collected in the same number of articles ratified in Paris by the UN General Assembly in 1948 after the Second World War must be strictly complied with by any left government when any government establishment takes over, as they constitute inalienable postulates. Joe.
At the national level, we must end the centralism of human rights promoted by the current neoliberal system. Although there have been some advances, much remains to be done. A palpable example of centralism in human rights is what happened in parallel in two harshly repressed Peruvian universities, one of belonging to the capital and another the provincial. Due to the event at La Cantuta National University of Education, where the aggravated kidnapping and treacherous murder of 9 students and a teacher were perpetrated, there are soldiers and the former president of the republic imprisoned. On the contrary, for what happened at the National University of the Center of Peru, with 250 students, 10 teachers, and 15 non-workers, assassinated teachers, there's no prosecutor, soldier, or prisoner, political officer. Former presidents of the republic. Let me move this along. Sorry, I just lost my spot.
Former presidents of the republic.
I've got a former president of the republic, Fernando Belaúnde Terry and Alan Garcia Perez, died with impunity without being tried for their crimes against humanity. Our party condemns every unpunished act of violation of human rights, individual or collective, whose perpetrators must be prosecuted and convicted, and is willing to make definitive and one-time reparation for all victims of terrorism within the framework of national reconciliation.
Well, look, I'll just open up any discussions on that little chapter. Oh, Joe, do you want to just readjust your camera? I just see your mouth and part of the bottom of your nose.
That's all right. I need to move the camera. That's the way. Not get too close to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, probably. I mean, there are some major issues which are. Well, there's a major issue which is related there, which is a good one to contemplate. You know, are we bound in the process of social change? Are we bound by the UNHR resolutions or the standards that are there? I mean, quite clearly says there, and I agree with it. And that's something that's not really discussed a lot. Perhaps it should be.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. The new socialist government we got in Peru, they're addressing this thing. They know what's happening in the past. They recognise the previous administrations, or regimes. How they neglected human rights altogether, basic stuff as well, and how they got away with it. So it's good in the sense where they actually exposed the system for what it really is. And it's not there for the common people, but it's only there for a very small clique of wealthy people. So those very few wealthy in Peru lived a very nice life, comfortable life. Nothing seemed wrong to them, but the vast majority, everyone else had to live in poverty. And I just wanted to mention something about human rights too. I was listening to another podcast, and way up just on my way to a site visit, and there was an interesting discussion. One of the things about human rights, that's right, someone on China, Caleb Morpham's interviewing a reporter from CTGN. Really interesting, and they said part of human rights is lifting people out of poverty. And I thought that's interesting. It's not about respecting other people's opinions or something like that. This is actually about lifting, so that it's about changing the economic situation for common people to improve their situation. So it was an interesting point. Sorry, Helen, I didn't mean to jump in there. Yeah.
No, that's fine. I was just reading over it again because it's quite kind of difficult to understand. But from what I understand is that there's an obvious criticism of the United States in there. The Peru Libre is saying, well, we are part of the Rome Statute, which talks about crimes against humanity, and there was that long list of things that are considered crimes against humanity: forced rape, violation of fundamental norms of international law, torture, rape, sexual slavery, all of those things, that long list of things that you read out. And interesting that Peru Libre has signed on to that, whereas the United States, the most major power of the world, has not signed on to it. And so there's that obvious contradiction. Well, here we are, a small little country. We've signed onto a document that says we will not violate these things, and yet the United States, the greatest power on earth, cannot bring itself to sign on to something like that. And the interesting thing about that is that quite often we see things in terms of legal and illegal, and the government of the United States commits so many crimes, but they're legal. So, for instance, if we look at their immigration, where they allow people to come into the country illegally, they use that labor illegally, but they don't call that trafficking. They don't call that human trafficking. And then they remove them when they want to. But all we see on our media and on our TV programs is we see the illegal type of human trafficking, where we might see 10 or 15 people in a boat crossing waters, or we might see 10 or 15 people in a sea container, and all of those situations are horrendous. Of course, I'm not saying there's anything good about those things, but the real crimes are really what governments around the world are doing in terms of human trafficking, and they do it for the sake of reducing wages in countries. And they, our 457 visas, is that not a form of human trafficking? Sure, they call it a labor shortage. Oh, we need to bring in these workers from overseas and so on. We're not going to do any more training of our own people here in this country, but we'll bring in other labor, and that's not called human trafficking. And there's so many other examples of how when it's legally done by a government en masse, it's not considered illegal, and it's not considered, nobody publicizes that in the media. And yet when we talk about illegal things, we go for the illegal, small, petty type of crimes that people are committing. Not that I'm saying human trafficking is a petty crime, but if you know what I mean, it's that the scale of crimes are far greater that are committed by governments in the realm of legal, compared to the amount of crime that's being committed in the illegal realm.
Yeah, I think part of it. I mean, just one thing that I think didn't come out really clearly there. I mean, the United States did sign the document in 1948, so they are a signatory to it. And I think with the UNHCR in particular, it was Donald Trump. There were instances of that before, but basically although they're signatories, they don't participate because there have been rulings against US policy by the UNHCR, and that's why they pulled out, because it's that question of exceptionalism, United States exceptionalism. They should apply to everyone else, but not to them. I mean, we can see some of the things that are direct violation. Certainly there's that. There was Trump's thing on the wall and the treatment of Mexicans. But it's also the case of Julian Assange, for instance, which is a strict violation of those conditions that they're signatory to. And there's a lot more. And because they have ruled against them, they say, well, we don't. It's not binding on us. We don't agree. And if you're going to rule against us, we won't participate. But they haven't dared to remove the funding, because then the funding actually is another form of pressure. They want to keep on going, but it also politically not very wise for them to pull out the funding, because they're threatened to pull out of the United Nations in the past as well, but they can't, because otherwise it causes them more problems. But I think it's that it is still a valuable document, and I think that's what Red has just stated, that it was something, that an agreement that was reached out of the experience of the Second World War. It happened just after, and there was this sort of mood around, popular mood, that we got to turn a new leaf. We can't go back to the past, and blah, and all the rest of it. I was going to say blah blah blah, but that's not the right thing to say. But but that history has been buried now. We're more than half a century. We're not really that far from a century past that, and so that memory has kind of gone a bit, and I think that's what's being used at the moment. But yeah, that's the I suppose on that document. I suppose the implication is, if we're demanding that others uphold those standards, then we're obligated to uphold them ourselves.
And I think that's what sorry, Dave. I think that's what the criticism here is from Peru Libre, is that it's saying, well, we've signed on to onto the Rome Statute, and yet the United States can't. But on the other hand, they use the Inter-American Press Association, which which this press association manufactures its own theory, ideology, and superstructure towards other countries, and that's what you were saying, Joe, as well. The United States exceptionalism, where they think, well, that doesn't apply to us. We can do what we like, but you must adhere to any documents that you've signed on to, any charters or any articles that you've signed on to. You must adhere to it, but we don't need to. And so this is quite clearly a criticism of the United States. Yeah,
I think that also in the case of Peru, they had the experience, and it's controversial within left-wing circles, is the experience of the Shining Path in Peru.
Yeah,
and there were many battlefronts, shall we say, and using bullets, and the Free Peru and the movement. In part it's emerged from this, and I suspect part of it is, let's not go back to those errors of the past that were committed by our side of politics as well.
very interesting point, actually. And there was another point I just wanted to raise. I mean, it's quite hypocritical. The United States wants every other country to abide by the charter of that, but when it can't do it itself. And I'll just want to bring up one classic, just recent example, Alex Saab, the Venezuelan diplomat, how they got him. I mean, they just basically kidnapped him and violated actually his rights. He's also his rights about being a diplomat and doing the right thing and everything else, and just without any reason, really, only because he was trying to do stuff for his own country, which every diplomat's supposed to do. And he did it, wasn't doing anything illegal or whatever, but they just assumed that because he's carrying out his duty, we'll just go and grab him. Don't know, God knows what they did to him in the meantime, and then they'd still have him in prison without any actually charges as well. I'm led to believe as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, or I could be completely wrong there.
He's been charged now.
Oh, he has been charged. Okay.
With money laundering.
Money laundering. Well, unbelievable. And the fact is, he wasn't. We all know that, but they find something to charge people on. Like Julian Assange is a classic example, and that he didn't leak any information. He didn't do anything. He's not even a US citizen. He was providing information, and he put it up on WikiLeaks. He didn't do anything wrong, but all those in the US government, Eastern establishment, Pentagon, CIA, and FBI think differently, and it just it just comes to show you the basic United States policy is extremely hypocritical in that point. And they go on very hypocritical.
I suppose that the thing for us here in Australia is to, I suppose, work out how what's been said there applies to us. And and I suppose in terms of looking at, now there has been one account. There was a young fella who's just been jailed for getting in front of a coal train and stopping it.
Yes.
He's just got 12 months. And there's a few people that have been arrested over that dispute, over the coal shipments. Climate activists who are being threatened with the possibility of 25 years, up to 25 years imprisonment. So we're having that. I think, in a sense, we're looking at the potential for violation of human rights here.
Yes.
But we've also got the treatment of refugees. We've got the treatment of First Nations people as well. We've got the industrial relations system here, which is pretty punitive. So that would, under those definitions, they'd all qualify as violation of human rights.
I just want to actually add something here, because they're not separate issues from each other. I mean, climate is connected. Climate change is connected to COVID. COVID's which is also, there's also the human rights questions. I mean, yes, and this is a big concern. Someone had blockaded a coal train, obviously. I mean, something, doing their bit to, put the strong message across to, we don't need to export coal anymore, etc., etc. And now they're in jail for 12 months. And like you were saying, these other actors could be up there in 25 years. There's also apparently a blockade up on the Burra Peninsula, just near Karratha, Dampier, the gas plant. Now, God knows what's going to happen with them. It's just slap on the wrist stuff. But this is the precedent stuff. And we're seeing what's going on as well, because everyone's talking about their rights and everything else, be it from a medical procedure being imposed on everybody, right through to everything, just speaking up. And it's actually funny. It's not. I'll phrase it's not funny enough. It's not funny at all. But just seeing, it's been this gradual erosion of our rights over the last 30, 40 years, and this is where we're now. This is the end result of where we're at now. I'll just
I just say there's one thing that's been left out, which is relevant to this, and that's, well, part you just introduced it there, is the militarisation of policing, which is going on. There's also the integration of the Australian military into the US military, which is proceeding faster than ever before, and that also brings up the relationship with other nations and peoples of other nations, and there is that push towards, there's the war with China thing, but I think behind that there is also the bullying of small Pacific nations, pressure being put on Southeastern Asian nations, and there have been, of course, participation of wars in the Gulf. There have been the cases of human rights abuses in Afghanistan, the events that happened a few years ago in East Timor, and all these things. So Australia as a nation, or the Australian government, has been carrying out human rights abuses in other countries, and that needs to be brought out.
And we're going to see it actually increase.
But we need to put forward people who need to put forward an alternative.
Don't forget to one of their big group of people is the Indigenous people as well, the First Nations here. How they're treated in migrant communities as well. So we're seeing this whole violation. When we're talking about human rights and individual freedoms, and I'm not talking about bourgeois individualism. We need to get collective freedom happening again, or to have a consistent fight back. But the thing is, it's what we're seeing now, and especially now what we're seeing the events over the last 3 months. What happens too, and unfortunately, there's going to be some people out there who want their Capitol Hill moment, or something very equivalent, because I'm getting very inspired what's happening overseas. That was obviously the powers that be just waiting for that trigger to order a complete crackdown. And that is a concern, a real big concern. Once they order, we've already seen it. We've seen it happen with Sydney, using back the military in police, but we see it here in Victoria with the paramilitary. And that's just a taste of things to come. So that, and we've also too got to understand we've got to rise above that left-right argument. It's a class issue, and we need to keep that focus on class. And really, what it is, what I'm saying, I could be completely wrong. I'm happy to be proven wrong. But I believe what it is suppression of working class people to even further rise up, because they were actually driving us back down into a low wage police state, aka prison industrial complex, along with the increased expenditure on defence, I'll call war, and using us and keep us on a war footing as well at the same time. So you can see all this is all interconnected and marrying up with each other. So this is good. This is a good discussion having this. So that's why I say it's quite relevant for what's happening here in Australia as well. What I'll do, we'll go on the next one, chapter 15 on justice policy. We'll just read 2 paragraphs each. Helen, did you want to kick it off?
All right. Historically, justice has been the desire of the ruling class elevated to the rank of law. In socialism, justice must be imparted in a transparent, scientific way with values and principles of the new society, avoiding solidarity from lodges, political parties, or economic companies. Election and the recall of high magistrates by popular vote. One of the core principles of the democratic system lies in the recognition of the decisions of the majority. In our country, of the 3 powers of the state, there is one that does not want to submit to the popular election, the judicial power. The appointment of this power, which ultimately decides transcendent matters of the court of the state, must pass the democratic filter and not be appointed by a small group of elected personalities related to the system of the country's ruling class. This leads to 3 important benefits: being a legitimately constituted authority, secondly, autonomous from political power, and thirdly, partisan. The election mechanism must be specified by the legislative or the constituent assembly.
Joe?
Okay. The high magistrates of the judiciary should not be ratified, as is the case with the executive and legislative branch, because it has been demonstrated that any re-election is directly proportional to institutionalising corruption. The current ratification of magistrates has proven to be a mechanism that lends itself to the benefit of judicial decisions, creation of criminal mafias, subjection of political power, or media pressure. In many cases, I should say, even sentencing innocents or releasing criminals in order to guarantee their permanence in office. The magistrates, as well as all the authorities of the legislature or executive, must be subject to the revocation of their positions when conditions do so. Demand no one can be eternally in power of the state in democracy. Suppress economic privileges for magistrates. I've got to move this up a little bit. In a country where the teacher and the doctor earn salaries between 2,000 and 5,000 soles, respectively, it is not fair that judges earn astronomical salaries. The president of the Supreme Court earns 47,000 soles, supreme judges 42,000 soles, superior judges 18,000 soles. In addition, that the state grants them luxurious vehicles of 60,000 US dollars, fueled driver, butler, bonuses, and security personnel, among others. Privileges that must be abolished in an act of justice.
Justice in native communities. The socialist state respects the ways of imparting justice in the native and peasant communities, taking into account their customs, culture, organisation, idiosyncrasy, because apart from being recognised, they are protected by international agreements and organised in peasant patrols and self-defence committees. The communities elaborate their own rules of conduct in councils and assemblies and have been more effective than conventional justice, managing to eliminate delinquency, drug trafficking, crime, adultery, among others, from their respective jurisdictions in a short time. This autonomy, of course, should not be confused with impunity, sovereignty of our justice. Pardon me. The Peruvian state should never abdicate its powers to international courts in any circumstance, as has been done in the case of financial law, where we have constitutionally lost jurisdiction. In international treaties and conventions, we are under the obligation to comply with international law, but we cannot submit to the legal control of the great economic powers and of the large transnational investors partial to big capital. Very interesting point. National legal stability. The legal principle must be fulfilled in order to safeguard the interests of the Peruvian state. It cannot be used to justify the permanent and unpublished looting of our peoples by transnational businessmen. Unfortunately, the current constitution protects all law contracts so that they cannot be revised and specifically prohibits such action from Parliament. Even so, they are harmful to our country.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
I just one sec, Joe. So I think what's interesting is that when we look at the structure of Peru in terms of its three arms of the state, it's uncanny how so much of the democratic countries around the world have the same structures, and so it's really it's incorrect for us to say that some things are a democracy and some things aren't a democracy just because of the nature of the leader, of who that person might be, because the structures underneath that leader seem to be more or less the same no matter what country you go to. And so I thought, listen, just reading that, I thought, well, it's very interesting that we call some countries democratic and other countries undemocratic, simply because of the nature of who that leader might be, or one or two personalities within that leadership. But the other thing that I was just going to point out was how the discrepancies between what a teacher earns and what these judges earn, and how they're elected by an elite group of people in the parliament or in the government, and very interesting that to put forward the idea that judges and so on should be elected by the people as well. And I think that's a brilliant concept. I think it's something that any socialist government would immediately invoke.
I think with an element of caution, because, for instance, the United States has a lot of their judges elected. No, really, because there's some differences between states, but quite often they are elected. In other cases, the jobs are for sale. They can actually buy a judgeship. And they tend to be more outwardly politicised positions there. I think partly because of this. This thing of the three powers was something that was born out of the French Revolution. Actually, to some extent, the American War of Independence. There were the beginnings of it, but it was really codified during the French Revolution. So something that was fought for, because before that, and what influenced the rest of the world in Europe, there was the king and those around it, and the people up the top, they had immense rights. No one else had any. And so in that sense, it was a historically progressive thing that happened. The problem is that there is a power outside of those three, and it's the power of a class controlling the means of production. And that bastardized, or I think some people said turned the whole thing upside down, or into its opposite. And while there's talk coming out of the positive tradition of checks and balances, they don't actually act as checks and balances. They act as a triple front that work very closely together, except when there is, on those who rule, that small section of the rural society, when there's a conflict amongst them sometimes, it works to mediate things. But overall it is that. So whether judges are elected or not is not going to change this. I mean, one of the problems in the United States too, with election campaigns, everybody gets elected, but it cost a squillion to actually run for office. Which
I'll just clarify that, Joe. I did say under socialism.
Yeah, that's why I think that is. I think there's a more important principle there, and that's the right of recall of people, and I think it applies to judges, and it should apply to other senior officials, that if they're not doing a job or they act against the people, there should be a right for their recall and their removal from that position. And I suppose the final one, it's disgusting that it was only teachers and doctors earning about what teachers do there, and judges getting so much more. It's a disgrace in any place. It shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
But I think it's that for us, our judges, and certainly particularly Supreme Court and the High Court, should be subject to pressure from the people in some way. Right at the moment, certainly in social society, they should be too.
I just want to add too, guys. I think for us in Australia here, we've heard about, from everything that's been happening for the last 3 months or so, and people talking about court challenges and also too with industrial arena, lodging disputes into the Fair Work Commission, or I call the Unfair Work Commission, and that I think it's got to be widely understand. And I mean, look, under a capitalist society, the law courts, or the court of law, the judiciary is only designed to uphold and maintain profit and protect profit. And that's what's there. So every law, every T, every I that's dotted, and a full stop put in the correct place is there to protect profit. I'm sure there'd be a dispute within that, but it's not there because some people come up with some big ideas. Oh, can't we just go to court? Can't we do this? And think the judges, oh yeah, no, that's a moral cause. I'll judge the rule in favour. No, what I'm explaining to workers the reason, especially with the Fair Work Commission, they look letter of the law, of bourgeois law, and that's what it comes down to, an interpretation of that. It's nothing, and actually it's interesting. I've had a few times, especially when some workers we've run an unfair dismissal case, or right through to something else, another dispute, and if it doesn't rule in favour of the workers, and I've only had a few, not many, but I'm trying to educate those few that have got it. Actually said the system is not for us, is it now? And I go, no, not exactly, and I'll tell why. It's not our system, and I think that's sort of understand. For us in Australia, it's not our system. We don't own it.
There's another factor on that, because it happens to unions, it happens to individuals.
Yeah,
that there's a problem when the other side's got a bottomless pocket, because they've virtually ruined some unions, not by winning cases, by subjecting them to constant legal procedures, all of which cost a fortune. If you're an individual, that if you have to go to court or you have to appeal against, even in civil law, often you've got no other choice but to take the matter to the Supreme Court. So if you've got 50 grand to spend, to throw out, to spend a day or two at the Supreme Court, okay, no guarantee winning, but that's what you've got to spend. And if the other side doesn't care, they spend billions. We look at the Adani case and some of the people that have been charged and arrested there. That's one of the things that's happened there, that there's been an open checkbook to actually prosecute them and keep on sending them to court where they can't afford to defend themselves on the same scale. So justice is actually bought.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too, I think it's I understand. Yeah, we've ever heard the term "we're equal before the law," and the question is, all right, say I'll just take the union now, but even if I wanted to, I was up against Clive Palmer, aka Jabba the Hutt, who's owned billions of dollars. How can I be equal in front of the law with him in the eyes of the law when I've got very little money? He can buy the QCs, he can buy the barristers and all that. How am I going to afford that knowledge? So I actually have to call out for help and people and fundraise and everything else. He doesn't have to do that. You know,
Well,
for example. I'm not just pulling him out, but I just thought I'd use that as an example. Could be any one that's qualified.
And the judge probably wants to finish up the case because he's got to go to the barbie at Clive Palmer's place. You know, they mix in the same social circles.
Or, you know, or a special elite, or a very elite club out there.
Yeah. They'll go. They have a chat outside court. You know, that's how they operate.
Yeah.
I think there was another really important point in there where right at the introduction they were talking about justice being not under capitalism, justice gets translated into law, whereas under socialism, justice is about values, and it's about so it's imparted in transparent scientific ways with values and principles of a new society. So I think that's important for us to understand as well, because our laws don't equate with justice. Justice under capitalism is just simply, as this document states, it's the desire of the ruling class elevated to the rank of law. So whatever their desire is, it becomes law. And we see that when there's anti-worker laws being passed all the time, they get passed within 3 months. Everybody agrees to them. Everybody passed, they're passed within 3 months. You get a law that might be the other way. It might be good for the workers, or it might be good for ordinary people. It takes months and years to get through, and quite often it will get voted down. And so our laws do not represent justice. And when judges sit in there and pass a sentence on us as the working class for whatever petty crime we might have committed, or whatever we've done wrong, they pass these judgments on us because the law is the desire of the ruling class, and the ruling class, the desire of the ruling class is to keep the working class down, and they use whatever mechanism they can. And I think that's really important. And so when we look at indigenous ways of dealing with law, or with justice rather, they have a system that's based on values and principles, not based on so-called laws that are written down by a judiciary that's influenced by high-ranking people and influenced by the ruling class with all of their money and so on. So I think that's a really important point as well that this document makes.
Another important point too is also if there is a ruling in favour of a worker or person or Indigenous First Nation people or with migrant community, I'll give you one example. The WorkPac or CFMEU Mining Energy Division versus WorkPac a few years ago, where they had where a worker was ongoing casual for many years. He was earning the 25% loading, which was supposed to compensate for sick leave, annual leave, and all that, because he's not entitled to it as a casual. But they took it to court. They took it to the commission. The commissioner ruled in favour of the union and said no, because it didn't fit the correct definition of a casual. Well, the company then took it to the full bench of the commission. The full bench ruled in favour. It doesn't meet the definition. Then went to the federal court. Again, they were challenging it all the way, backed up by the federal parliament or federal government. To the hill, and also business groups such as the Australian Industry Group, many others, went to the federal court. Even the federal court said, no, letter of law. This is the definition of casual. So yes, what you've been paying him, plus he's entitled to all the annual leave, long service leave, or sick leave, etc., etc. Get to the High Court, and the government threatened they were waiting for this to hang out, and the High Court said, letter of law. That's what interpreted. Now that was huge. Everyone's going, yay! Whoa! Everyone felt pretty jubilant. That was of course, that would be a good that was a good win, because it would have a flow-on effect to everyone else. Fact is, then this is where the Parliament steps in. Well, we'll need to change that legislation and turn to law, and it won't be just 6 months casual conversion. If you've had 6 months continual service, you may elect to go full-time and you've got a very strong case. It's now 12 months due to economic recovery. And on top of that, it's still up to the employer's discretion. So even after 12 months continual service, now, because the legislation was changed earlier this year, thank you, not just to the Morrison government, but to Pauline Hanson And all those who, all the, those nasty little parties that agree to it. But I'll call One Nation out because I know there's workers out there that think Pauline is an easy beast, and so no, she blah, 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 and this is what's happened. And even after 12 months continual employment as a casual, without any of that anymore, because they changed the definition of a casual, so you're not entitled to any annual leave and all that anymore. No. All right, I'd like to go and elect to be full-time. Sorry, I haven't got really much time. We'll just have to take it a month at a time after that. You could be there for years if you want to be as a casual. So you haven't got that job security and everything else. Thanks to that. So if a court does rule in favour of a worker, be it from the commission right through, I can guarantee you, the ruling class will be going, right, we'll need to fix that on our behalf, of course, and bring up Prime Minister. Get that fixed up, please. Yeah, thank you. And that's all they do. And they just do it with a phone call, so this is where the situation's at. So that's just one classic example. What I've shown there, and then of course there's many more.
Well, there is that other side. I mean, and that's probably in a sense. I'm not saying it's good, but I'm saying that you've got a couple of commissioners, for instance, at the moment, who are prepared to sort of go a fraction in the workers' directions because they come from a slightly different background. But if you go the higher you go up in the legal system, it reminds me of a conversation. This wasn't a judge, but I think the sort of thing that reinforces things. Now, this husband and wife, business people, they came to Melbourne from Perth and they brought their business over. But they were going through a relative bit of a patch. And I was sitting in a kitchen talking. She was doing most of the talking. And the attitude being, everybody's a bludger. They came from West Australia and Aboriginal people are no good. But, the workers, they want everything for nothing, blah, blah, blah. But they were really upset. And you know what they were upset about? Because they were so hard done by because they would have to keep their mercs, I shared that one too, for 2 years instead of 1 year before they got the new model out. And that was a great disaster and it was unfair. And how can they be in such an unfair place while others, the rest of the world's bludging? And that's the kind of outlook because they generally don't know other sorts of people. Everybody's in the same conversation in their circle. They don't mix with other people. And, how many judges actually mix with people who are not filthy rich?
Exactly.
And think the way they do. And continue, and it passes through generations. And I think that's a major avenue where you have a small group keeping political power in their hands. It's through that social networking that they have amongst themselves and the shared attitude to the way they see the world.
Interesting.
So they don't necessarily have to sit around a table organising things. They just work in that direction automatically.
Yeah.
That's it. Well, look, what we'll do, we'll go on to the next one, the socialist woman, and that'd be an interesting one to talk about. I think we'll just do it. How many paragraphs there? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, look, I think we just read 3 paragraphs each, and we're happy with that. So, Helen, do you want to kick it off?
Alrighty. So, the socialist woman. The woman in socialism is an active protagonist of the revolution. She educates herself, works, produces, emancipates herself, and bequeaths an invaluable inheritance. Actively participates in the policies of construction of the structural base of society, and especially in the superstructure. Machoism is nothing more than a sequel to world society with a multifactorial cause. Registered since ancient times, since women are the first to be enslaved. In the future of humanity, it is exacerbated with colonization and is reinforced after the implementation of institutions, public, secular, and religious, which consolidates the pattern. The family is the state in miniature. You cannot demand demand change in the family if you do not change the state. The neoliberal system wants to make people believe that equality for women can be achieved without transforming the mode of production of a society. As a vital element of social transformation, our country must initiate a process of depatriarchalization that we carry as a colonial heritage, that is, banishing machismo or machoism. Without this meaning, installing its opposite, extreme feminism. Thus, the problem of women's freedom does not lie in sexual difference, but in the social model to which it belongs. The method of oppression that humanity attends the most is economic submission, because it determines the oppressor-oppressed relationship, showing that there are men who oppress women, but also women who oppress women.
Joe.
Thus, women finally have to fight against their own gender, as there are women from the upper classes who are not willing to lose their social status, nor do they understand the need for social transformation in favour of the less favoured and influenced by their privileged situation. Women's movement is a threat that they have to counteract at all levels. The neoliberal state can be declared in the verb defender of feminine rights, but it does not assume responsibility towards the family. We mean to guarantee free and universal healthcare and education. In this system, it is preferred to imprison the parent if they do not financially comply with the family nucleus. That is, the state outsources their responsibility. The socialist state, on the contrary, regardless of the circumstances, is obliged to guarantee the nutrition of the mother and the child, as well as education and health, which must have the character of social inheritance. Likewise, in the socialist state, the reproductive rights of women and men are respected. Nothing can have a compulsory or coercive nature.
The socialist state must banish stigmas that qualify the female sex with an image of irresponsibility and social immorality, such as prostitution, trafficking, the transmission of venereal diseases, etc., which are nothing more than a byproduct of the mercantile capitalist society or neoliberal policies. Women in socialism cannot renounce education at any level. On the contrary, they must strive to gain the latest knowledge about pedagogy, medicine, engineering, architecture, law, politics, the military, etc. Even in these times, contemporary women have better liberation tools if they know how to use technological and computer progress, which will allow them to fight that natural profession that is home and family. The intellectual level of women, it is demonstrated according to neuroscience, has the same potentialities as in men. Actually, in our language, it has the same potential as men, as well as the cognitive capacity. It only differs from the opposite sex in the affective sphere, which gives its female quality. Helen.
In the field of health, women have every right to claim and implement the best maternal and paediatric services in the state, because many of them have seen the face of death at our birth, and many of them have succumbed to this act. It is a mistake to separate the education of men and women from initial education to the highest level, a circumstance that prevents a more horizontal and free social treatment, which attentions to mutual trust and the reciprocal complement of characteristics. In the workplace, women have achieved multiple triumphs. Industrial development allows them better opportunity, although they are also exposed to occupational diseases. Women have shown more capacity than men by not having major problems in merging manual work with intellectual work, which helps to eliminate the antagonism between the country and the city with greater flexibility. I'll keep going. The spirit of women must be in the most complex tasks, since no change is possible without their participation in an organized manner. For example, women in our times have a historical duty to actively participate in the fight against arms and the danger of war.
Yeah, that's really good, actually. I'll open it up.
Yeah, it's a problem. I think there is, and in Latin America, the question of machismo is stronger than most places. It's a bigger question because there has been a bigger tradition of it. In Spain, probably one of the things they added in there, it's an issue there. I think the Italians have got it as well. Some way. So in some societies, it is worse than Australia. I'm not saying this place is immune, but they use the word macho. That the sort of the hairy chest thing. But I think one of the experiences of travelling to Venezuela, which is not far away, and I presume fairly similar in that respect, there has been a big battle against machismo there, and I have to say now, I read recently that officials, particularly elected officials, women make up about 54%. So there's more than men now. And you see that on the ground. And I see in the Comuna movement and various things, the activities going around, the mass organisations, women are at least half of those who participate. Their challenge is, and got that from some of the women, is that they've learnt a big lesson, the blokes, the males. We're doing all this and we're doing this and that, but machismo still exists in the home. So often the woman would be working with in solidarity with the men and so on, involved, then goes home and cooks the tea and looks after the kids and the bloke's too tired, he reckons. Stuff like that. So there's still that sort of problem. It's still really strong in the home. And that's their issue. And what they were saying, but we're showing them and we're going to make them change. So it's a question of not being told, the women themselves asserting themselves. And I think that's important. The same thing here. One of the problems with the women's movement or sections of it is that I think it's been channeled into dead ends, into the wrong directions, where there are arguments against some of the irrelevancies. I remember a few years ago in Melbourne, there was a major argument on International Women's Day over, and there were a group there who were really, really upset, and they wanted, the big issue for them was on the traffic lights, the little green man, they're all men.
Oh, they're a figurine, male figurine.
Yeah, they reckon half of them should have skirts on or something. So and that became their big issue. And one of the problems is it's this sort of glass ceiling, the sort of bourgeois idea of women's rights. It is, we want to become executives. We want to become as bad as the blokes, And those who are really doing most of the battling for women's rights are working class women who've been fighting for years, originally to be able to have a say in things, even things like the suffragettes to get the vote, but working conditions, equal pay, those sorts of things, to be treated properly at work. They're the real issues, but there's been the sort of the public face of the women's movement. The sort of, Ita Buttrose type thing. I don't want to criticise her too much because I think she's a mixed bag, but personally, it's been this sort of image of we've made it too. We've made it too in terms of capitalist society, and so that itself is divisive. And the other thing it does, that those sections that set males as the enemy cause a counter reaction to women's rights, which causes more of a problem.
And I think
we've got to be in this together.
Yeah, and I think women under socialism obviously understand it far greater than women under capitalism. That's been shown by the rise of women in socialist countries. Russia was Soviet Union was the first country to put a woman in space, and they had all sorts of things. women were able to achieve. There were childcare centres in the factories, so that women could go to work and participate in working life. All the domestic chores were outsourced and were considered work, not the sphere of the women only, or a domestic chore. It became outsourced and social. So that the alleviation of ordinary, boring jobs that go on in the family, a lot of them were alleviated from women, because women are mostly the people that do that sort of work, do the housework and so on. And so rather than struggle against your partner in that domestic sphere, we need to be saying, how can our society alleviate us from this problem? Not just me as a woman, but also our whole entire family, so that we can become a family that can spend time with each other, communicate with each other, participate in society. We can learn. We can be together on without this drudgery of housework taking over our waking hours and our only relaxation time.
Yeah.
So I think women under socialism were have always gained so much more out of socialism than what feminism or what the women's movement has ever gained under capitalism. And I remember seeing a poster when Nicaragua first had its revolution before I'm going to say the 80s or 90s. Anyway, I saw a poster and it was a woman she was breastfeeding a baby. She had a rifle over her arm. She was probably only 21, something like that. But the slogan was, I cannot be free if my man is not free. And so I think that's the essence of feminism as well, is that none of us can be free if another person isn't free. White people can't be free if black people aren't free. Men can't be free if women aren't free as well. And really that freedom comes from participating in the domestic in the productive life of society on an equal basis.
It's actually got really good points. I was listening to a Workers' Party Britain podcast today with Johnny Brard. They're talking about simply the trade union side of things, and they talk about the women's movement and through on. And what's interesting, what's from a class background, well, basically from a bourgeois background, they'd be a woman. Oh, yep, you can both work in and out of home if you like now, and that's basically it. And because under a capitalist system, if you're available to work, that's the only use you are to a capitalist. Otherwise, and to the system itself. But if you're not, well, you're too old. You just pretty much discarded it onto the scrap heap. And you can see it within our society here in Australia, where say women are raising their own kids. They're a sole parent, and both parties, Labor and Liberal, Labor and Liberal, same old dribble. Put policies and enforce policies in place to keep them down, forcing them into situations where they can't afford it and into precarious work. The other situation as well, it's a lot of it. But I actually brought this up at the last federal election campaign, and I brought this up what about superannuation? Now they're forcing everyone to be away from the pension and onto superannuation. How does a woman, especially if she's only been a sole parent, been out of the workforce some time, because you need to actually be working to obtain superannuation, and you've got to at least have a 38-hour week on some half decent wage to you've got it on some good superannuation. You haven't got that. So by the time you hit retirement age, which will be 67 for my generation, we can mention, you'd have very little left. You'd be lucky if you got a house as well. So in fact, for someone like a woman in a capitalist society, when they're seeing them get to an older age, all they're going to be seeing is destitution and poverty, looking forward to it. So they're going to be put into a position where they're going to be pretty much forced to work until the day they die. They'll clock off and then jump in the coffin and get buried. So, and that's basically what will happen. So for a fact, this is just how, when they're saying, oh, there's equality, when I mentioned, well, there's equality in front of the law. No, there isn't equality. And that's just one big. It's the income there. It's a guarantee to a good retirement. Can have a fruitful old life as well. Enjoy the fruits of labour, but also too within their respective industries as well. A lot of it still, and there's a lot of organisation needs to happen, and even more or less like to get something half decent out of it, and we could see that right across the board as well. And I think for many years in this country, what was interesting, and I made some comparisons with the early Soviet Union. Soviet Union was one of the front runners of bringing women up to equal parity everywhere. They were in all the engineering jobs, scientists, everywhere in government. They were doing everything alongside with the men, even fighting in World War II. They were at the front line with the males. That actually, some of them became crack elite troops because they're physically, and they used to I don't forget what they named, but they dressed them all that white fur, and they used to wear during the winters and stuff, and ski past German or Nazis, German troops with machine guns and just mow them down. And they were excellent pilots too, because especially their dive bombing squadrons like the Night Swallows, that they were feared by Nazis, and so they would have played a lot of a leading role in that. And Soviet Union was the first country to do that. And even China, when Chairman Mao actually turned around and said, "Yeah, women hold up half the sky," because they got it and they need to come to the forefront. But we see here in Australia, they're using everything conceivable means. But mainly, we've got to look at it. It's economic to disadvantage them further again. And you're right. How can we say we're free when the opposite sex is not free, or if Indigenous is not free? We're not free. Marx actually pointed that out many years ago in the 1800s with the Irish question. How can people? I'm of English origin. I said, how can we be free when the Irish are oppressed? So
I think there is all that. I mean, one thing about women doing a good job. I'm one examples in the mining industry in Australia. I mean, a lot of women are now driving those big trucks because the mining companies have worked out that they don't wreck them as much as the men do. So it's actually cheap. The bloke's a bit rough on the pedal. So and the engines last longer, and clutches and so on. But besides that, and I think one thing that's said in the the Peru document is that there is still an issue in the home, and it exists here too, because generally speaking, it's not only the men. I mean, quite often the women expect it too. That it's the woman's responsibility, the woman's job to cook the meal, to wash the dishes, to clean the house. And I come across, the women sometimes they get upset the bloke does anything. I'm not good enough, you reckon? So there is a part of education on both sides, learning to share everything. It's not always easy for some. One of the problems is today, with a fair number of males, is the kind of loss of status. What's their role? There's a lot of confusion amongst males about what their role is, what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing. The old argument, once upon a time you're supposed to open the car door for the woman. If you do now, you're likely to get clobbered. But you're likely to get clobbered if you don't as well. So there's, you know what I mean? That sort of thing. There's a certain insecurity there and needs to be gone through. And I reckon that's about men and women actually working out in the home as well as in production out of society. I think I got the impression that document is also alluding to that.
Yeah. I think all of those social norms can be easily overcome and can be easily changed, and the education process for that is an easy enough one, but it can only be overcome if we live in a society that wants to adopt those kind of changes. If we don't live in that kind of a society, then it's going to be very difficult for any types of changes, and the gender roles, learning to change those gender roles and to not even have gender roles, if you like, and so on, is under capitalism again, it's about divide and rule. And so if we can have men and women fighting against each other in the home as well as in the workplace, then we're not going to gain this equality. But if we live in a socialist society that says, well, we want everybody to participate in society equally, then those kind of social norms can be easily overcome. I think they're not deeply ingrained in us as much as what the media and so on would like, and then and they can be overcome quite easily. Yeah, fortunately for us, they can be easily overcome.
Yeah, no, I think for the lesson learned from this, and even from this document for us in Australia, it needs to get the movement back, women's movement especially, but that struggle back on the right track again, and back on the rails again, because what I saw the International Women's Rally on earlier this year. This is the last one gone back in March. It was divided, people fighting, and it's just like, yeah, there's all these genders, and it needs to get back on the right track. And I think it'd be good if working class women can get hold of it again and give it that direction, and give it a good socialist direction. Because interesting, equal rights of women and all that was a socialist demand. It wasn't a capitalist demand. It wasn't a feudal demand. It wasn't a slave demand. It was a socialist demand from the socialist communist movement, and that's what it was. It was actually socialist women that kicked it off. Kicked it off in the first place. So I think we've always got to go keep in that mind to get it back on that path again. And
in feudal society, women had more equality in the sense that work tended to happen in the home. And it was shared through the family. The parents and their kids would share the work. So there was a lot more of that. It was the rise of the factory system that changed all that.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's still, there's still a way to go. And I think one of the things is, again, I think, that debate about the shift back in the end of the 70s, certainly from sections that was calling itself the communist movement, and certainly it extended from there, the conscious shift away from the issue of class to social politics, to social movements as an antidote to class, really fragmented people and put people, including the women's movement, into separate pockets, where in a sense those who were not in that pocket were looked at or encouraged to look at them as the enemy, rather than finding where are the points of unity. Where is the unity across society?
And what, just on that, because I mean the last things we've done, the one on the socialist women, the one on the judicial system, and also on human rights, it's got to be a class issue, and it's got to be back into the class. Again, we can't be divided into little subgroups, and it was done deliberately to divide us and to smash the working class and organised working class. Because one thing the capitalist class is afraid of, the ruling class is afraid of, is an organised working class. It knows, well, that's why it spends billions of dollars every year smashing unions and any other type of work, and attacking other types of working class institutions and organisations. But Amazon's a classic example. I'm not going to drive it off the field here, but there's been a extensive union drive there, and they're spending hundreds of millions, billions, to try and stop that from happening. I mean, you think to yourself, why? Why spend all that? They don't care, because they are afraid of organised workers. Well, and going back to what we're saying, we're going back to your point there.
Because that's what happened, and I think it's all tied up to certainly we look at Australia as an example situation. In those days, the political defeat of the Communist Party, in the sense which had caused, as part of causing its fragmentation. I mean, people had gone through a long period of McCarthyism, and it wasn't only that; it was mistakes in the way of operating as well. But combine all the factors that people who were in the movement, or some of them, we're losing, we're getting isolated, maybe it's because we talked about class all the time. It was that kind of reaction and they were looking for a way out, I suppose, to say it's nothing that I did wrong, but it's just that we've been on the wrong tram. Maybe it's because we talked about class all the time that we got isolated politically and put on the edge. Now we're talking about a communist party that in the 1940s, numerically, as far as membership, was bigger than either the Liberal Party, or what became the Liberal Party, or the Labor Party. They had a bigger membership, they had a big base, and they were actually growing and getting influence, particularly in working class areas. It was during that period that setups were organised. The Communist Party was actually banned for 3 years. Yeah. And there was an almighty battle. There was the, what's his name, the fellow, the spy thing, the Petrov case, where the Petrov case was about demonising and destroying the credibility of the Communist Party. And all these things were there. And, you know, they actually, although the individual battles weren't won by the ruling class, they actually won the war in the end. And we're reeling from that still. And we need to rediscover our feet and stand up again and, you know, have an orientation somewhere. And that escape from class, because that was the problem, not all the other stuff I mentioned, actually gets in the way, or got in the way, and is still getting in the way to some extent of really finding the way forward. Because if we don't do that, what we're doing in our practice and the things we say, well, we really believe that the current order is permanent. We just see what we can squeeze out of it. It's no use talking about change. That's what it really means, although it's not consciously put in those terms.
Yep. Helen.
No. I would agree with everything that Joe says there. Yeah, I think it's a good point to finish on and move on to the next chapter, if you like.
Yep. All right. Well, we've got a little bit of time, so this is going to be an interesting one. It's about, hang on, 1, 2, 3. Well, probably works out to be 3.5 pages. It's called About Our Main Sources of Wealth. I recommend, if you want to hit the first 3 or 4 paragraphs, Helen, and then we'll go to Joe.
I just lost my page. Anyway.
Oh, yeah, it's chapter 17. Yeah, About Our Main Sources of Wealth. This is a good one.
Okay. So about our main sources.
Sorry. Go.
Yep. About our main sources of wealth. There are many sources of material resources, such as services, from which the country can extract wealth for its support. The main ones being the mining sector, hydrocarbons, the oil sector, hydropower sector, and the communication sector. There are also others such as banking, commerce, construction, fishing, agriculture, transportation, etc. According to the ranking of the best companies in Peru of the America Economica portal for 2018, the companies declared the following net profits based on estimated data from the Industrial Information Export Data and estimated data based on export. So the mining sector, the companies that have obtained the highest profits in 2018 are Southern Peru, which is $450 million US. The Society Minera Quiero Verde is $119 million US, and Shalgong Hero, Peru, $138 million US. Together, the net profits of these 3 mining companies are $716 million US, which is equivalent to 200 million, I think, 3 something or other million soles. It's a lot of money, And we can infer from that these 3 transnationals receive net profits equivalent to the initial annual opening budget of 10 regional governments of the country, considering that each government in that year begins with an average of 250 million soles for investment expenses. can we just have a bit of a chat just about that so that we can clarify? So what we're saying is that we've got three mining companies in Peru that earn or receive net profits equivalent to 10 regional governments of that country, and I bet they don't pay very much taxes on that net profit that they're extracting from Peru.
It's interesting. I'm nodding my head because it's just like, yep, this is happening here as well. The big players such as the BHP, Rio, Glencore, Chevron, Woodside, all of them being the oil and gas sector to the mining sector. How many billions they earn a year, and just how all that going into a profit into fewer hands, concentrated fewer hands. And I'm not just talking about Gina, Twiggy, or Clive, but also the international finance and then their shareholders. You just picture that's bigger than our national budget or our national income. We're going to get very little tax from it, and it's like what I'm seeing here. That's why I'm nodding my head. Is you just when you put your mind to it, it's just gobsmacking. It's mind blowing. Yeah.
Well, it's even worse because, for instance, that most of the mining companies operating in Australia are actually run by 2 or 3 entities. One of them is Glencore, as it was mentioned, and I mean that's the biggest mining company in the world, and it has dozens. There are dozens of other mining companies that are actually subsidiaries, although people don't know that they are.
Yeah. So I'll read this next thing because it'll finish off at that sector about mining. So this amount, which is the 250 million soles for investment, this amount is without, sorry, it's probably actually referring to the 200 million soles.
Investment expenses.
Yeah. So this amount is without considering other important companies that do not declare net profits, but that occupy important places in the ranking. And then the article goes on to list about 10 or 12 different companies, which I won't read out because, what's that?
Glencore gets
mentioned.
Right, yeah, it does. Yep, I can see it there. It should be clear that the sum of these profits represents 70% of the profits awarded entrepreneurs after the exploitation of our resources, leaving the Peruvian state only 30,000 in the best, 30%, in the best of cases. So I think that's the important thing. These multinational corporations are getting 70% of the profits awarded after exploiting the resources of Peru and leaving the Peru state only 30%. So when we talk about foreign investment and thinking that's good for the country because they bring in jobs, etc., the fact is that they're extracting far more out of the natural resources than they're giving back in terms of jobs and so on, and they're making squillions of money doing it.
Yeah, bigger than our national income.
Economies and so on. Yeah.
I mean, when you talk about the 30% going to the state, how much of that 30% actually gets handed back?
And that's another point. Yeah. Back to the companies and subsidies and so on.
Yeah, in subsidies, tax breaks, various other things.
And through corruption as well, because of all these lucrative works and perks. So with this whole idea of trickle down, liberal policy, this is it here. This is what we're seeing. So the trickle down we only get a little drop. There you go. There's your little bit. You should be happy now. I don't know. And
it brings up to my mind just a thought of a few years ago, ex-Liberal Party leader, the same mob, who's actually campaigning against them. He's onto the climate stuff. John Hewson.
Oh, yeah.
He wrote an article, a damning article, because there was the thing of the state deficit thing. Oh, we can't afford anything, limit. We've got to cut expenses. And his article was centered on, we don't have a budget deficit, we have a revenue deficit. what happened is that government actually stopped collecting revenues. It did no longer collect enough revenues to meet its obligations. That's where the problem is.
Yeah.
And that's part of the whole thing. And I think we should be looking at this this whole question. It is not that the government's not getting enough, has enough to spend. It's that it's not raising enough to spend.
In other words, it's not taxing the multinational corporations.
Well, it comes down to that, because if you're going to actually increase people's living standards, you have to go from where it can be afforded.
Yep.
Exactly.
So, want me to go on with the next bit?
Yes, please. You can do the hydrocarbon sector. That'd be great.
Hydrocarbon sector. The National Mix Company with private capital has obtained the highest net profits in 2000. That has obtained the highest profits in 2018 is Peru, $120 million, and a Papilla minus $57 million, despite having decreased their production after the privatization of 49% of their shares. Transportadora de Gas del Peru, US dollars 232 million, plus Petro Camisea, US dollars 99 million. Sonatrach Peru, US dollars 62 million. The sum of the three is 393 million US dollars, or 1,296 million soles. This is equivalent to the annual budget of 5 regional governments. A separate point deserves the fraud against Peru regarding the exploitation of Camisea gas. Plus, Petro Camisea buys 1,000 cubic feet of gas from Peru at 54 US cents, while Bolivia sells at $7 US. Chile, $10 US, Argentina, $15 US, and resells it between 10 and 14 US dollars. It pays Peru royalties and income tax of 1,135 million US dollars, and not the 23 million US dollars corresponding to the market price.
You mean 23,000 million, which would be like in the
23,000. Yeah. Well, there's a huge gap there. The 23 million US dollars is equivalent to the amount of 75,900 million soles. That is the annual budget of 340 regional governments. Another example, the annual education budget of the country is 3.5% of GDP, equivalent to 7.844 million US dollars, which means that only with Camisea we would be able to triple our education budget, including teachers' salaries. So that's a pretty big gap. Plus Petrol Lot 56 did not declare net profits in 2018, but reports sales of 207 million US dollars, and previous years it had declared 158 million US dollars of net profits. Just as Plus Petrol Lotte 56 hides information. So do Primac, Repsol, Peruana, and Combustibles. Natural Gas Natural Lima Caleo, Hunt Oli Company, SP, Repsol Marketing, Sol Gas, Sea Operadora de Gas de la Amazonia, Coga, Yama Gas, Eco Combustible, etc. And if people don't know, Repsol is Spain's biggest oil company.
Yeah,
so they're exploiting them there. So, want me to continue? Or
I'll continue on the next one. I'll just mention just two things. You want to adjust your camera again. I'm just seeing the bottom of your chin now. So
that's right. I knocked it.
Yeah. See, this is the other classic case. I mean, in the petrochemical, oil and gas sector. Just the same thing is, where do all these hundreds of billions of dollars go? That we don't see it. It just gets sifted out of here very quickly, and we never see it again. And it's like wealth lost. That could have been. We could do. I'm just looking at what we can learn and do with that in our country. If we just even if we probably tax the hell out of them, with just that money, what we could do to Australia as well. But if we seized it, I mean, we'd be obviously, it'd be just unlimited what we could do here as well. So it just comes to show you the capitalist imperialist system is basically we'll export the debt and the inflation, but we're taking everything else. And there we go. And that's what we're seeing. And and I wouldn't be surprised with a lot of these companies here. You mentioned the Espiano or Spanish ones, but also too like the Standard Oil, the big oil in the US, Exxon Mobil, Chevron, etc. And I mentioned Standard Oil, so that'd be all playing some games in behind the background there as well. So it's follow the money. And someone said to me once, and you'd be surprised who's behind the scenes pulling the strings.
One thing one of the early chapters I mentioned about the international control of financial accounting, in effect, because there is a system now. Accountants talk about there are what's called, because there used to be national standards. Now there's international standards which they need to comply with increasingly. And it's those who are controlled in those standards. I mean, some of them, for accounting purposes, if you've got to go to an accountant, are fair enough. But there are those that actually create disadvantage. And one of these things that I suspect that helps, and I'm no expert on this one, but the aiding and abetting, in many ways, the tax dodging industry, the use of tax-free havens. Because the fact is, I suspect other countries are like Australia, although on the books that company tax is set at 25%. First of all, there are lots of write-offs. You can actually avoid paying that. And even then, that you can, in effect, launder the money by using either tax-free havens. Now, cryptocurrency has become a means to do the same thing. And so you're depriving, although on the books, they charge 25%. I mean, you could put 90% on, but if you leave these other measures, they still won't pay any tax. There's got to be a comprehensive look at these people actually paying, or these companies paying their way. And people who are very wealthy, they've got means to make it technically legal. They don't have anything, and so they don't pay tax. The whole approach to taxation, and in Australia, the whole Tax Act needs to be scrapped and a new one put in. Because it is a history of amendments. Apparently, it's the biggest. I haven't seen the act, but apparently it's a huge volume. It's just that every 5 minutes there's an amendment, which means each time you put an amendment, there's half a dozen new loopholes have been created. And it's a bloody mess, and they like it that way. And what we need to do is completely start from scratch, have a brand new tax act, and apply it.
And I like the way in that document there it says it talks about fraud, and I think that's how the working class needs to see corporations, and that they're committing fraud because they, as you say, Joe, they've got the ability to find the loopholes in the tax system and not end up paying any taxes at all. And in fact, the government, and like that section on justice, the ruling class makes justice law. So, but it's their law, it's their justice, it's based on what they need, not what's actually justice. And so they find the loopholes because the law allows for that, because it's their law. It's their law that says you can find as many loopholes as you like, and therefore, well, it's justice because it's law, and you can avoid taxes, and you can avoid paying for your participation in this country for taking those mineral resources, you have to pay your share. But if you can find loopholes, well, that's law, that's legal. You can take all of the wealth out of our country, and that's it. And I think that's very important. And again, it comes back to that whole thing I was saying right at the beginning about when it's legal, when governments allow for that to happen, we call it legal. But when we commit a crime, it's illegal. But the rape and the pillage of our mineral resources, is an absolutely criminal act by both the government and these corporations. And when the problem is when you raise it with workers, a lot of workers say, well, we're so imbued with the ideology of the system. They say, well, if we lose them, they'll just go offshore and they'll take their business with them, and we won't have any jobs. They'll take the business with them. But we can't seem to understand that without us, they can't create any wealth. They can't take that stuff out of the ground. They can't just take it. They have to have workers that are there working. And so if we, regardless of who's running that corporation, if it's a company or if it's our government, the fact is that we are the ones taking the stuff out of the ground. So the easy solution to corporations walking away from their companies because they perceive that their taxes are too high, or that we're taking too much money through the government mechanisms. Well, the simple solution is, well, we will take it over. Yeah. And somehow we have to, as workers, we have to recognize that we create the wealth, so we should have a say in where that wealth goes. And if they want to leave, the multinational corporations want to leave, then within our constitutions, even now, there is scope for nationalizing those companies, and we should be demanding our government uses those laws.
But we don't have to compensate them either, because they've taken so much out of you. So if they say they want some compensation, you're not getting it, because the reality is you've already extracted. How much more wealth do you need to extract? Sorry, you can't anymore. And basically, when I'm hearing, from everything, like from the oil refineries shutting down and all that, people say, Shell goes, that's it. Well, goodbye, and don't come back. We're taking it over. And take the name with you too. It sucks. So, so basically, that sort of thing, we should be forcing that decision. And it's a good point that you've raised that it's in there. That's a part of our constitution. We can do that. At least there's some part good about it, because mostly it's an administrative type constitution. But at least there's something good out of it for once. They're saying, I think that should be it should be right on the agenda. As I said, I'm just seeing all this wealth, both in solid form, like a mineral wealth and getting extracted, but the amount of money we don't see, we'll never see.
This issue of compensation, and how they invested in that. If we look at the mining industry, can't complain. They get compensated before an issue comes up. So that's where it starts from. But if we look at the car industry back in the 50s, General Motors invested, in today's money, about $2 million. They put £1 million into it. Most of the money to actually set up that operation came, there were two parts. One came from government's direct subsidy, and the other one came from selling shares to Australians in Australia. Then they toured out a couple of years later. They turned around and actually bought the shares, so they secured the ownership. But so in that sense, they've been back. Since then, for $1 million or $2 million in today's money, over the decades, they actually got a little bit more than that back. Now, I remember that when I was working at Ford, one of the senior managers one day, he came and said, this share, he said, proud of, like he said, he owned the thing, but he said, we declared $10 million loss at the end of the financial year. But at the same time, we distributed $20 million to shareholders.
Yeah.
And that to me, that was a lesson that sunk home. It only showed, some creative accountancy has been going on here somewhere. You know, the same fellow once told me, he bragged to me, he showed me a door, a car door, and he said, see this door? It's just been shipped in from Japan. We had it manufactured there. And we paid 3 times the market rate to our subsidiary in Japan. We do the same thing with our subsidiary, and there was one in South Africa, and then there was one in London, there was one in Spain, there's a few in the United States. Well, that was a parent company. But they buy, at that example, the bits and pieces from themselves at 300% the market price. It's what's called money transferring.
Yeah.
It's one of the main. Now, it's supposed to have been outlawed in Australia since, but it hasn't, because it's never been policed, really.
Yeah.
And you know, get a clever accountant or two, they can hide the figures somewhere. But technically, one company is registered in the Australian Stock Exchange. The other one, for instance, that one is registered in the Tokyo Stock Exchange. So they can say legally it's a transaction between 2 different companies because they're registered in different stock exchanges. But in reality, it's the same company. And multinationals routinely use those kind of tricks. For instance, we are told that BHP is the great Australian company. It was never Australian owned in the first place. Its major owner was the AMP Society for many years since its founding, which is basically a British financial institution.
Yeah.
And now the major shareholder is the Billiton family. That's why it's called BHP Billiton. They're the ones, and they're based in the United States. It's just one of the companies they own. So we need to uncover what is going on behind the structure. You know, there's an appearance of competition. There's an appearance that companies are different companies, and there's unreasonable trade. But we are living in a world of cartels, and that is what is being used more than anything to actually avoid multinationals paying their share back to society. Because society, they're taken from society, but they're paying very little back. And as far as creating jobs, GMH has got that thing. I mean, they weren't even necessary. It wasn't going to happen. It's just the Australian government was pressured into it. They threw a few peanuts this way and said, well, give us it all back.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because you mentioned BHP, and actually what came into my mind too, the steel industry for Australia, because right up prior to, it was pretty much World War One when it actually started turning around that we didn't actually have a proper steel industry. And even that, during World War One, Australia had to get permission from the UK and British banks to start a steel industry here. BHP, when you mentioned it, was, yes, British investors on the London Stock Exchange, Broken Hill Proprietary, you all know that. But the fact, and that's the mining, but when it came to also the steel manufacturing side, we weren't allowed, and we could not just do it ourselves. We had to actually have express permission, basically from the Privy Council. They're allowed to do it, and it was by British capital to bring in the first steel industry. BHP was part of it. They played, hence BHP Steel for many years.
But what happened to that?
But yeah, well, exactly. They like that I set off, and obviously, when we're saying we've got a steel industry here, we've got steel mills, we've got Port Kembla and Whyalla, but the fact is, they're not nationalised industries. They're going up for private hands. And I mean, yes, I know the story about Whyalla, and the guy of Indian descent lives in the UK, put a lot of money investment into Whyalla, and he became the town hero because he saved the steelworks, and to some degree there was an element of truth. But the reality is, at the end of the day, that doesn't still address the point. The fact is, when we're looking at all these industries, it's about nationalising them, and also guaranteeing, we'll get to the point, our national sovereignty as well and security. Because at the moment, we haven't got any really national sovereignty. When you think about it, we're dictated to by multinationals. Every policy, every full stop that's put in a sentence is so it's guaranteed the rule of the multinationals. If we just want to if we want to move inch, and the rule of the multinationals is then enforced by Washington and the Eastern establishment, and Wall Street, the banks of London, and the financial institutions of London and New York and Tokyo, etc. And I just think when we build down, they're talking about the 4 big Australian banks. Well, they're all owned by them. It just seems to, what do we actually generally own here and control? And actually, which means it's a control thing too, because that's actually another thing. It's more than just ownership. It's about having control of it again too, and redirecting all that. So, yeah, that's a big fundamental question here.
Yeah, well, there was a three big opportunities. Again, the vehicle industry, when Ford closed down, then when General Motors closed down, when Toyota closed down, there were 3 opportunities for a government to step in and say, all right, you don't want to run it. Well, if you don't want to run it, someone else can.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's, to have the guts to actually take that principled stand. And then they could have bragged, "Oh, we're preserving jobs," that's which would have been true. But it was an opportunity for the unions come in, and I'm really, really happy that the AMW Metal Workers Union has actually taken that up as a policy.
Yeah,
it's their own policy to actually pursue that direction. That if you can't do it, get the government, the workers, the government together. Maybe some other parties can come in, right? We can finance it. We can keep it going.
Yeah.
But it'll have to be run on a basis that actually, of course,
just for all the viewers, the AMW, the state branch in Victoria here, we adopted that policy about 3 years ago, the 2018 2019 state conference. Basically, if a factory, it doesn't matter how big or small it is, if it decides to shut down, reduce jobs, then those workers have got the right to take it over. And run it with government assistance and community assistance as well, either into a co-op or a nationalised industry, because we're especially in regional areas where we're seeing everything shut down and just it's decimating, and just seeing then there's all this capital flight to the cities and capital cities, and and we'll see it. So that was a policy. Yes, it's got a lot of work to do. And mind you, it's been fun action packed for the last 18 months. Another big issue we've been dealing with. But reality is, that is there. We need to talk about within our own branch how we now move forward with it. The other interesting point is you pointed out too, last year when all the airlines were grounded because of COVID, they couldn't fly anywhere. Now, there was the opportunity, like if Richard Branson was pulling out of Virgin, pulling out of Australia. I thought, you go away, you parasite. No one wants you here. At the moment he's flying rockets with his mate Bezos into space. I wish they'd keep going towards the sun.
Run out of fuel.
Non-stop towards the sun. I want to, seen again, however, just going back to it now, Frydenberg, the Federal Treasurer, comes out. He was nearly screaming black and blue in the face, veins pulsating out of his forehead and green smoke coming out of his ears because there was demand, let's nationalise the airline. And he came back, I am not nationalising the airline. Carrying on like a pork chop, like nothing else. And then he said, they basically say, here's an airline, someone, come and buy it. Quick, buy it. Let's nationalise the thing. Great.
And what was their excuse for not nationalising? They said that we need competition.
Yep.
Yeah. In a place where
the market needs competition.
Yeah, where there's only one airline.
Yeah.
Actually doing the domestic. I mean, one thing is that they don't like to face or don't like to hear is that Qantas was a public airline, a government-owned airline for a long time, and during that period, it built an unrivaled reputation internationally as the best airline, the safest airline, the best service, etc., etc. Since they sold it, it's actually gone downhill pretty fast.
Yeah. All the name.
It's gone to its opposite. It's actually less safe than it was. The service is atrocious. It's all corners cut, and they're still not happy. And on top of that, it is maintained by government subsidies continuously. They're making a fortune, and their CEOs and leading executives are paid millions and millions of dollars in salaries and bonuses and so on. And they're one of the worst employers in the country at the moment. The way they've screwed their own workforce, all sections of their workforce, even management level. The morale is shot in that company internally. And, it won't run properly if it's government run.
Yes, I've heard that millions of times. So I was actually talking about that, about the railways the other day. Here in Victoria, I was at Bendigo Railway Workshops. We were meeting there with the members, and anyway, it's owned by Southern Short Haul Rail, or run jointly. And it was a Jeff Kennett era privatisations and everything. Anyway, freight companies. You got freight multinationals owning the freight side of things, and then Southern Short Haul. Then you got the passenger side, V Line, and then you got Metro, which is now a private thing. I think the tracks are still government owned, but it's privately maintained, private. But the thing is, when they're saying, "Oh, this was all about efficiency and private's a great way to go and competition efficiency," it hasn't. The fact is, you can't run freight trains, like be it on wheat trains or rice trains, they're coming down from the river or wherever. Only can go in the early hours of the morning because the V Line service cannot interrupt the V Line service, let alone the V Line service cannot interrupt the suburban service of Metro. When it was all Victorian government railways, it ran fantastically. It was unison of the goods or freight train with the passenger, regional passenger and suburban passenger. It all intermingled perfectly,
Well, the union, the RTBU, the union that covers the rail system, or basic the transport system, has its policy of the renationalisation. I mean, because when it happened after Kennett, I mean, the contracts that were signed, they don't actually own the services, they lease them. But written into the contracts, these companies have a minimum profit guarantee, I think, for 35 years, then to be renegotiated. It can continue. So they are, it's a 35% that if it's not met, the government actually fills the difference. Infrastructure is kept under public expenditure. They don't pay for the infrastructure.
No.
So it's a rip-off. It's they're bound to make enormous amounts of money because they're raiding tax money for it.
Coffers.
Now there has been, as part of the PR, they have extended networks. They have improved some rolling stock and stuff like that, and there's more rolling stock. There's more transport on the timetable. And longer hours, but they've had to do that for legitimacy. But we're still paying for it. We're still paying for it, though. They're not investing. That's the point. They are not the ones who are investing it.
That's right. Sorry, Helen.
Well, the only thing, just to draw it all back, is I think the importance of workers trying to understand that privatizing corporations or companies, taxpayer-owned companies or services is never going to result in a better service or more efficiency. The fact is, and the fact is that when we talk about companies leaving because there's an issue with they're not going to be able to make as much profit or they're being taxed, the fact is that we've run corporations before, we've run services, and our governments are capable of running those services, and the public service is capable of running those services. And we have to understand that in order to understand that if we desire change, then we have the knowledge and we have the history behind us to say that we can do it. And we have to have faith and understand that the way we're going is just more and more of major corporations ripping off our taxpayer dollar and they will be giving less and less back. And we have to recognize that to make change, we've got to recognise that we create the wealth. We've got to have a say in how that wealth is shared, and and a discussion about that, about everything tonight is really fundamental to that idea as well.
I think there's also the fear of that, of not having it privately owned, and back in the 40s, at the end of the 40s, the Menzies won a federal election on a scare campaign around the which was because I said before, the Communist Party was the biggest political party in terms of membership, expanded space, threatening the Labor Party. So the Labor Party adopted a policy for nationalising the banks and lost the election on that. But the interesting thing is, because the privately run banks of that period could not do the job, and 5 minutes later, Robert Menzies created the Commonwealth Bank, which was a public bank. Yeah, I see that comment.
Nice one, Luke.
It is true. I've been following some of that. It's quite interesting what's going on over there. But that idea, that in itself gave a strong indication that that in order to secure finance for the needs of the economy as well as people, it wasn't enough then to rely on a wholly private owned banking system. So why is it now?
Exactly.
Actually, James
Crane, the Commonwealth Bank by the federal government and state governments, it was used to develop the education and health systems and other things. So it was a time relative boom, but it would not have happened without that.
Yeah. So I'm just wary about time. It's a few minutes before 9, so we'll wrap it up. Dylan, did you want to have a further say?
No, I think that's a perfect way to end. We've just got to understand that we've done it before. We can do it again. Yeah,
exactly. And look, I think it's got to be a political will of the people, the working class itself. It's got to take up the mantle. I think one thing we could be here for hours all night discussing strategies and way forward, but we need to take matters back in our own hands and push this as well, not just wait for the next night in Shining Harbour to come along and vote for me on election day, bump them in the parliament on election day. I think we've got to start looking at better ourselves and have faith back in our own strength again, fight for it, because it is a struggle.
Could I mention just quickly before we go, because one thing which we need to answer, because I mentioned the scare campaign over the nationalisation of the banks. An element was that their advertising was to working class people, they want to take your home. They will take your home, take your home constantly. And people need to make clear there is a vast difference between, we don't want your home or your pots and pans. We want we think that the key resources of the nation should be run by society for society as a whole.
Yeah.
You can keep your home. Matter of fact, we think it's a good thing that you have a home. Yeah. And we've got to make that clear, because I think sometimes we don't.
I'm going to rock around to probably someone like Gina Reinhardt's house or some wealthy bastard's house. And
that's probably big enough to be used for another purpose anyway.
Yeah, you can all come around too when I get in there. We're going to have a party.
I mean, one of the things that we have helped in the Venezuela side a little bit is an agricultural college. It used to be owned by the lord or the landlord, the latifunda, as they say there, who owned that bit of land. It's the big mansion, but the landlord only sort of came for a few weeks every other year to make sure everybody was doing their job and blah, 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 and making a fortune. He lived in the United States, which is typical there in Latin America. The landed gentry live in the United States, and the big sort of owners of big companies. So they decided, local community said, well, He won't let us use the land to grow food, so we'll grow food, but he never uses that big mansion. So they actually occupied it and developed an agricultural college out of it to grow sustainable food. Now they have a law there now where if the community can gains possession of a property and can prove within 2 years that it's being used productively, then they're entitled to a contract of ownership. That's the law there at the moment. And
those who work the land should own the land.
Well, that's why the landowners are getting a bit angry. Occasionally they get somebody shot. They hire somebody to shoot someone.
I just remember the dead Kennedy song. I just remember the dead Kennedy song. Let's the landlord. Let's the landlord now. So, look, I'm going to have to wrap it up tonight.
Look, he's still probably in Miami or wherever he is. Still got squillions of dollars, but at least he doesn't have that property anymore.
Exactly.
Well, look, I'm going to have to wind up tonight. It's 9 o'clock. We will continue on with this subject because the next part will be the energy sector, and then goes on about communication, economic sources, etc. So quite a bit to it. But look, again, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Helen, for tonight, and thank you everyone else for watching. Once again, please feel free to share it far and wide. Invite everyone on. We will be meeting, I think, in another fortnight's time, because next week, just so those you might not be aware, I'll be down in Ballarat on the 2nd. We'll do I'll live there. But on the 3rd of December is the 167th anniversary of the Eureka Stockade, the actual battle itself. So I'll be there on that Friday morning for the service there. It's starting at 4 o'clock in the morning. Mind you, that's when it started. So some historical time for us here in Australia, especially in the central goldfields here as well. A very important event. So look, thank you once again, everyone. It's been a great discussion tonight, good reading, and we'll continue further. So we'll just finish it off with a chant with Dare to Struggle.
Dare to struggle.
Yeah, dare to win.
Dare to win.
Dare to win.
All workers of all countries unite. Thank you, everyone.